We're individuals, we run at different speeds, we have different levels of fitness. Despite all of that, could there be a perfect heart rate for running? Is there a number that we should all be aspiring to? Well, I'm going to be rewinding and covering the basics of running to heart rate and then doing my best to answer that question. Our heart rate reflects the effort that we're putting in. So the harder we work, the more oxygen that our muscles demand, and to react to that, we'll start to increase our breathing rate and our heart rate at the same time. But it's worth pointing out before we go any further that there is a lag in your heart rate increase that reflects your effort level. So just once you start working harder, it's going to take a few seconds or more depending on that effort level, and obviously we're all different as to how quickly your heart rate will catch up. And the same goes at the other end of the spectrum. When you stop exercising, your heart rate's going to take longer to go back down to normal than your effort level will. Imagine if you're running for the bus, for example, you get on the bus, sit down, and you can probably feel your heart rate racing even though you stop moving. We need to cover some of the variations between person to person before we can go on and answer this question. There's factors such as your age, your fitness level, the air temperature, caffeine, stress, any medication you might be on, the terrain that you're running on, the list goes on. So to be able to sort of compensate for all of those differences, we need to work out what is normal for you. And a good starting point is by working out your maximum heart rate. Now, there's a really old school sort of rough calculation you might have heard of before, which is 220 minus your age. So say you're 30 years old, that would mean in theory, your maximum heart rate would be 190, but that is a rough guide at best. And if you do want to have something that's more accurate, you're going to need to do a heart rate running test, which admittedly is hard work, but it'll give you a really nice accurate number that you can work from. And for more details on that, I'd recommend checking out our GTM video on how to run to heart rate. Now, I'm not sure if you guys can see right now, but it's pouring down outside, so I think we're going to have to move in to finish the rest of this video. Okay, we've escaped the rain, I've got my coffee, it is time to crack on with the rest of this video. So hopefully you've got that magic number. We can now start to turn our focus towards heart rate zones. And yes, we are actually still getting closer to answering that question of whether there is a perfect heart rate for running. So heart rate zones when it comes to running are usually divided into 5, and they'll reflect how hard you're working. And you'll find that some watches will automatically actually tell you what zone you're running in, often using a colour. They'll work this out by seeing how hard you normally run and guessing or estimating your maximum heart rate. And it's quite typical for zone 3 to come up as green. You'll often see that's kind of the zone that you'll quite often find yourself in. Whereas, for example, zone 5 quite often is reflected as red because it just shows that you're working extremely hard. But if you don't have a smartwatch or you want to work out your zones manually, it can be done. Just have to hope that you're quite good at maths because there's some percentages needed here. So zone 1 is between 50 and 60% of your maximum heart rate. Zone 2 is 60 to 70. Zone 3, 70 to 80. Zone 4, 80 to 90. And yep, you guessed it, zone 5 is 90 to 100% of your maximum heart rate. So I expect you're starting to see that the thought of having an exact perfect heart rate for running is looking a little bit like a myth. There are so many variables that can affect your heart rate by just a few beats per minute from day to day, from activity, from temperature. You get the picture. I mean, if you went out and did exactly the same run 2 days in a row at the same time of day, you ran at the same pace, I would still be really surprised if your heart rate was exactly the same. Well, that's where zones come in handy because they're going to give you an indication of the fact you're running at the same intensity, but leaving room for those slight variables that happen normally. Well, with all of that in mind, I thought I probably need to reword the question and ask, is there a perfect heart rate zone for running? Well, it's complicated. There is no exact answer still. I mean, were you really expecting it to be a black and white yes or no? Because if it was, it would have been a rather short video. Each heart rate zone has different benefits and is used depending on what you're training for and what your purpose of running is. I mean, if you take someone who's running purely to lose weight, well, they're going to be training in a very different zone and a different program to someone who, say, is trying to run a fast 5K. So I'm going to break it down and look at each zone and what's happening physiologically when you're running at that heart rate. Zone 1, this is very light, it's super easy feeling, so you should feel that you could run at this pace all day and quite happily have a conversation. So this zone is perfect if you've got a recovery run scheduled or you simply want to go for a social run. Zone 2, this is light, it's still easy and conversational, but you might find that your sentences are maybe just a little bit shorter and your body's going to be working aerobically here, and it's at a very low intensity, so it does actually mean that your body can convert fat and use that as fuel. So it does sometimes get referred to as the fat burning zone. Not to be confused with the best weight loss zone, because that's purely about the amount of calories that you're burning. This is just using a different type of fuel to fuel your run. So because it is such a nice low intensity, it means you can hopefully stay in this zone for quite a long time, and it's great for building that aerobic base which you can then do your faster work on top of. And in actual fact, irrelevant of what distance or speed you're training for, zone 2 is often recommended to make up about 80% of your training intensity. Okay, that 80% figure was probably a little bit of a giveaway. Zone 2 is actually the closest you're going to get to the perfect running zone, but we're going to come back to that one once we've covered the final 3 zones. So zone 3, this is a medium level of effort. You're very conscious that you'll be working at this intensity, and you can normally maintain this pace for somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes. It's still going to be predominantly aerobic, and it's great at boosting that aerobic capacity. It's often termed as a tempo pace. Zone 4, you're working hard at this zone. So think of running sort of your 5k PB pace, that really uncomfortable, yeah, you know you're really going for it. And it's a mixture of aerobic and anaerobic work, but your body is going to be predominantly still using carbohydrate as fuel in this zone. And working in zone 4 is great for doing some intervals at race pace and just boosting that aerobic threshold. Zone 5, this is really pushing it. It's basically a max effort. So think sprint finish at the end of a race. Really though, you're not going to be spending very much time in zone 5, especially in your training, unless say you're a sprinter or maybe you do team sports which involve lots of short sprinting intervals. So when you do find yourself in zone 5, you're not going to be able to stay there very long. So if you are using it at the finish of a race, make sure you don't go for it too soon. I touched on that magic zone a moment ago, but it could be a little bit confusing. You might think, well, you want to run a 5k PB and the majority of your 5k race is going to be in zone 4. Yes, it is, but that doesn't mean you need to do all of your training in zone 4, as you would simply burn out. In actual fact, you need to do the majority of your training for a 5k in zone 2. So you're building that aerobic base, and then you add in spikes of more intense work, and then also a little bit in zone 1 when you're doing some recovery. And then you could be someone who's trying to lose weight. Well, zone 2 is the fat burning zone, as I mentioned, but that doesn't mean you have to stay purely in zone 2. That's just a way that your body is using fat as fuel. But if you want to do some shorter, sharper intensity efforts, that'll burn more calories and will help with the balance in a shorter period of time, and also help keep your running more interesting. So I think to conclude, you have realised that there is no such thing as a perfect heart rate or even a perfect zone to do all of your running in. That said, I would say zone 2 is that magic zone that you do want to spend most of your time in, as it just has that wonderful ability to build a base, and then you can add in bits around that. But remember, when it comes to running, you want to keep your body stimulated with changes of pace, but also that mental stimulation, so you keep interested and you keep enjoying your running. Well, hopefully this has slightly answered that question and made things a little bit more clear as to what intensity you should do your running at. Give us a like if you have enjoyed it. Remember, you can check out our social media channels and follow us there, and you can also subscribe to us here on YouTube.